Hello and welcome to our lesson on multiplication rules for negative integers. In this lesson, we'll build upon your existing knowledge of positive integers and basic operations, as well as addition and subtraction with negative integers, by introducing the rules for multiplying negative integers. We will start by learning the fundamental rules for multiplying two negative integers. Next, we'll explore what happens when a positive integer is multiplied by a negative integer. After this, we will run through some examples to apply and practice this new knowledge. In our previous lessons, we've established a thorough understanding of positive integers and built up our familiarity with numbers greater than 0 and their properties. We're also familiar with the four operations with positive integers, these being addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We have also learnt about addition and subtraction with negative integers, and we understand how to handle these operations when involving negative numbers. With this strong foundation in place, we can now introduce the multiplication rules for negative integers. These rules are essential for solving a variety of mathematical problems that involve negative numbers. Let's get started and delve into these multiplication rules for negative integers. In terms of raw calculation, multiplication involving negative numbers is essentially the same as it is with positive numbers. What changes is the sign of the result. The main thing we need to focus on is determining whether the result will be positive or negative. When multiplying with negative numbers, we encounter two distinct cases: a positive integer multiplied by a negative integer, and a negative integer multiplied by another negative integer. Let's see how to handle these cases, focusing first on a positive integer multiplied by a negative integer. Let's consider how to calculate -3 multiplied by 4. One way is by writing out the repeated addition and adding these values together. We have determined through this that -3 multiplied by 4 equals -12. By the same logic and considering the commutative property of multiplication, which means that order does not matter, we can also have 4 times -3 equals -12. This holds true, even though it's difficult to conceptualize repeatedly adding 4 minus 3 times, as multiplication is consistent regardless of order. From these observations, we can generalize the rule. A negative number multiplied by a positive number results in a negative number. For instance, -2 times 6 can be calculated as 2 times 6 and then adding a negative sign, -2 times 6, which equals -12. When we have a situation involving a negative number multiplied by another negative number, such as -2 multiplied by -3, the interpretation isn't immediately clear. It's challenging to apply the concept of repeated addition here. To resolve this, let's work from the principle that mathematics should be consistent. Consistency means that every correctly executed calculation will always yield the same result every time. Consider the example, -2 multiplied by -3 plus 3. According to BIDMAS rules, we first handle the operation inside the brackets. -3 plus 3 equals 0. Thus, the equation simplifies to -2 multiplied by 0 equals 0. We can also approach this through the distributive property, which states -2 multiplied by -3 plus 3 is equivalent to -2 multiplied by -3 plus -2 multiplied by 3. For mathematics to remain consistent, this expression should equal 0. We already know -2 multiplied by 3 equals -12, so we can simplify the equation to -2 multiplied by -3 plus -12 equals 0. We can simplify this even further to -2 multiplied by -3 -12 equals 0. Solving this, we get -2 multiplied by -3 equals 12. Therefore, we generalize that a negative number multiplied by another negative number gives a positive result. This means that -2 times -3 is the same as 2 times 3. The result is positive. In summary, if both numbers have the same sign, both positive or both negative, the result is positive. If the numbers have different signs, one positive, one negative, the result is negative. By understanding and applying these rules, we can confidently handle multiplication involving negative integers. Now let's move on to some examples to solidify our understanding of these rules. Consider the problem -4 times -6. First, identify the signs of the numbers. In this case, both numbers are negative. Next, apply the rule. We know that the product of two negative numbers is a positive number. We can multiply the absolute values. 4 times 6 equals 24. Now determine the final sign. Since both numbers were negative, the result is positive. So minus 4 times minus 6 equals 24. Now let's look at 7 times minus 3. Here, one number is positive and the other is negative. The product of a positive and a negative number is a negative number. We can multiply the absolute values. 7 times 3 equals 21. Since one number was negative, the result is negative, so the result is 7 times minus 3 equals minus 21. Now let's look at a problem with three integers. Let's solve minus 2 times 5 times minus 3. Here, one number is positive, 5, and two numbers are negative, minus 2 and minus 3. Now group this expression and multiply it in pairs. First, multiply the first two numbers, minus 2 times 5. Now apply the rule. The product of a negative and a positive number is negative. Multiply the absolute values. 2 times 5 equals 10. After adding the sign, this gives us minus 2 times 5 equals minus 10. Now we can multiply the result by the third number, minus 10 times minus 3. The product of two negative numbers is positive. Multiplying the absolute values gives us 10 times 3 equals 30. The final result is minus 10 times minus 3 equals 30. So minus 2 times 5 times minus 3 equals 30. Finally, let's apply this to a word problem. Imagine you are working on a project and you lose 4 points each day for 5 days in a row. What is the total change in points? First, identify the daily loss. Here we lose 4 points a day, giving us the value of minus 4. The number of days is 5 days. Now, we can set up the multiplication minus 4 times 5. We know that the product of a negative and a positive number is negative. We can multiply the absolute values. 4 times 5 equals 20. Now determine and apply the final sign. Since one number was negative, the result is negative. So the total change in points is minus 4 times 5 equals minus 20 points. By working through these examples, we can see how to apply the multiplication rules for negative integers in various contexts, from simple arithmetic to word problems. In today's lesson, we explored the multiplication rules for negative integers, building on our prior knowledge of positive integers and basic operations. We started by understanding that multiplication involving negative numbers is essentially the same as with positive numbers, but the sign of the result changes based on the signs of the numbers involved. We covered two main cases, multiplying a positive integer by a negative integer and multiplying two negative integers. For the first case, we learned that a positive number multiplied by a negative number results in a negative product. In the second case of multiplying two negative integers, we demonstrated that the product of two negative numbers is positive. Understanding and applying these rules enables us to confidently handle multiplication involving negative integers, enhancing our problem-solving skills in mathematics. Watch the rest of the GCSE Maths course at Sophos Education.